It is a great and cold day where I sit in the city of New York. But for all of you, I hope you are embraced by the warmth of our conversations. You like the way I did that? I got many more of them. But again, my name is Basil Smikle. I'm a professor of practice and the director of the graduate program in nonprofit management in the School of Professional Studies at Columbia University. This is our leadership series where we spotlight the work of leaders in the nonprofit philanthropic advocacy space. Today's conversation will be with someone who has become familiar to our program of late, and we are so glad to welcome her, Crashonda Andrew. She is a global philanthropy leader and senior vice president of global philanthropy at United Way Worldwide, where she leads private development efforts to mobilize the caring power of communities around the world to advance the common good. She's got more than a decade of experience in nonprofit and international development. In her current role, she served as vice president. Crashonda served as vice president of individual giving. Prior to her current role, my apologies, she served as vice president of individual giving at United Way Worldwide and held senior fundraising leadership roles at the NAACP and Feeding America. She's on the board of directors of the Association of Fundraising Professionals in the DC metro area, frequently speaks with students and emerging professionals about careers in philanthropy, global development, social impact. A North Carolina native, holds an MFA from the George Washington University and a BFA from Savannah College of Art and Design. I really want to talk about that too. We'll get into that. For certified fundraising executive and chartered advisor in philanthropy. Crashonda, it's wonderful to have you with us today. Thanks for hanging out in our Lunch and Learn series.
Thank you, Basil. Thank you, Basil, and thank you, Lonnie. I'm really glad to be here with you all today.
Yes, before I forget, I want to thank members of our team. Lonnie Ryan is the deputy director of the program, and Andy, who's always with us and keeps us on track technologically and programmatically. So thank you so much, Andy, for all of the work that you do. For all of the participants there, we have some current students, faculty, prospective students, and members of the public that want to hear from Crashonda. So we're excited to get into this conversation. But you may have questions. So if you do, there is a Q&A feature in Zoom. Please send questions. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible in the hour that we have. So Crashonda, I'm a big fan of the Actors Studio. I watched it religiously. Everybody that sees this program has heard me say that. So I like to begin at the beginning. Tell us, I mentioned it, but tell us where you're from originally, where you grew up.
So I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina, aka Vietnam 910, and military brat. I started in philanthropy unbeknownst to myself. My grandfather started a soup kitchen when I was younger, a Marine vet, and kind of raised us in the soup kitchen serving folks. And so that's how I kind of got introduced to what a servant leader really is. And then from there, I'm a theater kid. I started I went to North Carolina School of the Arts for high school, studying drama and theater, and ended up at Savannah College of Art and Design studying the performing arts, arts administration. And my path into nonprofit leadership was kind of not traditional. I moved to New York and became an actor. And like most artists, I had a day job. And my day job, I worked with an organization called Elder Share for the Arts. I was hired by New York City Department for the Aging to design performing arts programs for senior centers. And so I would go around the city. I had a little bike at the time. And I would ride through the boroughs.
But you were riding a bike through New York City. That is...
I don't know. I was just hungry and eager and North Carolina girl moving to the big city, full of adventure. And then I ended up in Brooklyn. And from designing the senior services, I got introduced to a nonprofit partnership program called Riseboro Community Partnerships in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And I saw how thoughtful programming can reduce isolation, build connection, and give people dignity and joy. And so I was hired by them to direct their senior services across 9 facilities. And suddenly, this actor who needed a day job had a full-time job. And I started managing teams and budgets and partnerships at scale. But I had someone there that mentored me and kind of saw something in me in the beginning. And that was my first real education in how nonprofits function. I learned that, my passion, which you probably see through the way that I speak or hear through the way that I speak, is essential. But I learned that systems are what sustain impact. And so that realization pulled me toward fundraising and philanthropy because I saw that the resources, if you're familiar with Bushwick, Brooklyn, and Bed-Stuy, marginalized communities where resources were scarce, I realized that would allow good programs to thrive if we could really learn how to fundraise. And that's how I started.
Now, I want to go back a little bit because you are clearly very experienced and very talented in the work that you've done. But going back to that first job, working with seniors, and the way you said that you've had to, learn budgets and spreadsheets and things like that. Sometimes we think about that work versus the arts as left brain, right brain. Those two things kind of don't mix. Was there any kind of cross fertilization? Did your training in the arts help you in the work of management and budgeting?
Oh, that's right. The heart of it, fundraising is heart and science. And so the heart helped me realize, when I started, it was transactional fundraising. A lot of those relationships were based on what they could get from the donor and what the nonprofit could give in some way. And so what I learned from the arts was the relationship management. It was really important that those key stakeholders had someone that they could trust, that they could empathize with, that they could talk to. So before I could actually pull into systems and structure, I had those, touch points in mind. I knew how to have relationship management just based on my theater background. And so that translated into I had to learn nonprofit, the operation component. But what I realized was, once you have the heart right, and the intent, that I talked about in the beginning about that servant leadership, I was just eager and hungry to learn. So I was there all day. I soaked up as much information as I could from folks who had been in the sector for years. And, what I realized is, the sector is really small, especially in New York City, and people were really open to sharing. So I'd go around to other community partnerships, other nonprofits, and talk to them about the operation component and how to store your data, what a CRM is. I mean, I was completely grassroots, learning, pulling up my bootstraps in this work and hustling and really figuring out, beyond the transaction, beyond the money, let's really get to the operation component. How can we serve our communities in a better way?
So from Bushwick, where'd you go next?
Oh, so from there I went to Fort Greene Senior Council. So there's a thread, and I started
Okay.
with my grandfather. I
Right.
am, my babies are senior citizens, are older adults. I've always been an old soul. I've always had a deep connection with them. So I went to Fort Greene Senior Council, which is the oldest Black senior center in New York City. It's in Fort Greene. And it started through a relationship. I had an older adult that attended the services, and her son was a part of the board of Fort Greene Council, and they were in jeopardy of closing some of their doors and needed support with senior services, but also with fundraising. So I got introduced to the executive director, and I went on to support some of their local senior centers and also help them keep the doors open. And so I went to Fort Greene Senior Council. And then from there, I became a student of Feed in America and went back home post-pandemic. My family is in North Carolina. Our food bank was, our nonprofit of choice in our community. That's where we supported and served, humble soup kitchen beginnings. And so, I went home. I was 6 months pregnant. And, I went to get reprieve at my parents' house, and we ended up doing a drive-through pantry just as a volunteer component, and met the director there, and he introduced me to, the Feeding America team. And we really talked about, in the Southeast, it's so rural that there's some areas where not only can they, people don't have transportation or technology, it's hard to get, food into those food deserts. And they really needed help with building systems and structure and connecting partners that can help close the gap. And so it started off with me just being there during the pandemic. And I was hoping to go back to New York City, but I was a mom of a 1-year-old and pregnant at the time. I went into labor the day before we were supposed to leave. I was drinking
Mm.
a Chick-fil-A milkshake and went into labor. And then my mom said, I think that's a
Milk,
sign you need.
milkshakes will do that.
It was so good.
Yeah.
Um, and from there, my parents saw that as, I grew up in a very spiritual family, and they saw that as a sign that I was supposed to support and help their community during this catastrophic time. And that's where my career took me, servant leader, and went where the calling was.
Now, I'd have to ask, from you went from North Carolina to Brooklyn, very different places, and then went back to Carolina. What did you take back to Carolina from Brooklyn? I imagine a place like that had a huge impression on you.
Here's the interesting thing. A lot of Southerners ended up
Hmm.
in New York City.
Yep, that's right.
So my family, my father was born Buffalo. Father was also in the military. He was stationed in Buffalo from the South. They moved to Brooklyn, Fort Greene specifically. So I had cousins and family members. And so we had half of our family that moved to South Carolina, and then, the folks in Brooklyn were still there. The thing that I figured out, and that's when I fell in love with diaspora philanthropy, is this art of, the South and New York have always been connected.
Hmm.
My summers were either spent visiting my family in New York or DC. But there's something about, they always would say when I grew up, going back home, we go back home for the summers. So I lived where back home was in the South. And so when I came to New York, I realized there's so much connection as far as funding. How do we really talk about, the grandmothers and the grandfathers that were being served in New York City? They had family in North Carolina that really cared about, their life and the services that New York City offered. So what I took from the South and brought to the North was that connection. I'm a Southern girl, and so that hospitality played a huge part in my career.
Were we hospitable back? Because
That's
as a New Yorker, we get a bad rap for that.
You do. And, I got a lot of, why are you smiling so much? And why are you saying good morning? And, the thing is with the South, we wear you down because we know that you want the hospitality. It's just the mean streets of New York City are really rough. But, I wore people down. And, I gained some really great relationships by just being myself and being authentic to who and where I'm from and who raised me. And so I say that my family was in Fort Greene. They were New Yorkers, but I reminded them of back home. And that helped build relationships, keep relationships, and made my introduction a lot more authentic in a city of, a lot of New Yorkers.
Hmm. Now, and tell me about the NAACP because I'd love to
Oh,
hear more about that role.
yeah, so that role of the evolution of career and hopefully another through line is relationships.
Yeah. Hmm.
So my great grandfather was a Buffalo Soldier.
Oh,
My grandfather was, military through and through our family. My grandfather was a member of the NAACP, and he fought for veterans' rights, specifically Black veterans' rights, and that got passed on to my father. And one thing that was really important is our NAACP family membership. I mean, I was graduate of AXO. It's a performing arts program. They were one of the first scholarships I received to go to Savannah College of Art and Design. That's always been an integral part of my family. So an opportunity arose through a woman in our church who was on the board of our local NACP. So the calling for fundraising, for at least for me, has always been led through my elders. And I was doing these, drive-through pantries and working with the food bank, and Feeding America really taught me the foundation of being a fundraiser. My skills came from Feeding America. But one of the things about, Black nonprofits is the operation component. So we have the passion, we have the need, but the skill was missing. And I remember going to church, and I don't know if you're familiar with, a lot of NAC fundraisers were through the church, and
Mm.
chicken plate dinners and
Yep, yep, fish
car
pies, that kind of
washes.
thing. Yeah.
And the Greek organizations are instrumental to supporting the NACP. But what we missed was the operation component. And so I remember being at church, and she said, you should bring all your skills to come help us really build up fundraising. And what I didn't know is a part of the relationship management was also being able to connect locals with national. I didn't know at the time I was doing what was necessary to move the NACP to another chapter. And so once I got introduced to their board, I got introduced to the national team, it just became an easy segue. And, I fell into becoming VP of individual giving because of need. There was a lack of structure. There was a skill that I had learned from Riseboro Community Partnerships to Fort Greene Senior Council to Feeding America that I knew my community really needed. And so that's how that evolution started. So I started the first individual giving program to sustain not only local chapters, but national chapters. And we built upon a membership model that trickled down to your local NAACP. And from there, it just became almost a seamless community and thread. I got to, meet with, other local fundraisers and help build their skills up. And then I partnered with my friends that were in the industry who are currently the team of the NAACP.
Mm.
And it just evolved to like, okay, there's something about this operations component, building the heart and the science and bringing them together for real sustainability for our communities.
Let me ask a question about some points that you raised there, because the two things that stand out to me that have been important in your career and bringing you to this point, um, I think is something that we need to highlight, which is one, how important it is when you work with big organizations that have national and local chapters, if you will, how you maintain those relationships so that the locals feel connected to the national, kind of, make sure that uh, the messaging and the relationship is sound. But also for those that may not have the kind of history of service that you've had individually and through your family, how do you connect the what's happening locally to legacy, right? Because I feel that that's a huge part, particularly with the NAACP, right? And
Mm-hmm.
for young people who may not get the history in an educational setting or through a family, member.
Right. Oh, well, that's where I think, as a nonprofit leader, you have to volunteer, but you also have to volunteer in a diverse way because it also is a great education for you. Um, I would say that, you know, from when I started from transactional to now relational, that was the case with federated models. It was quite transactional. You think workplace giving, you sign up through your work and that money funnels to the nonprofit of choice for that corporation. Now technology has changed in how we communicate and how we track impact. And so from a local level, local organizations kind of operate now with an international context. So I think, our local NACP in Fayetteville have now partnered with their HBCUs that are local. So the alumni are now a pipeline for them for donors. And those alumni might live, in New York, who can then become members. So for those that don't have sort of that legacy context of how the federated model works, you can always volunteer at a local nonprofit. First, they need the
Yeah.
volunteers, and
Right.
it'll help you understand the mechanics, right? So for NACP, a lot of the branding similar for local United Ways. The brand you license from your national office. With the NACP, we federalized the fundraising. So there was a federal model that kind of helped the locals outside of membership. So they pay their membership dues, but if they want to give a gift or sponsor membership or support AXO and youth opportunity, they can make a gift outside of that, but they would make that to the national chapter. And so with that kind of that understanding and that grassroots fundraising on the impact that you have globally, it kind of helps with the context. So I would say volunteer and in local, if you can, those local organizations, Feeding America, similar model, right? That will kind of help you understand who you're giving to, but also who you're partnering with, and the network that is a part of that.
Right. Now let's talk about the United Way. How did you get there? And tell us about the model, because I don't know if you touched on it a second ago. Not everybody really understands the
So, okay, let's start with how I got here. So serving in AACP, we were working with, there was a climate justice, climate change initiative that was happening in Raleigh. It was a press conference that was happening in Raleigh, North Carolina. I was serving with the wonderful leader, Derek Johnson,
model.
in North Carolina. Angela F. Williams, our former CEO, was there at the time. And you have these, I would say, I call them both two Black superheroes that were in the same room. And this was a $3 billion initiative with the government. And they had a seat at the table. They were a part of the conversation. And just so happened to be in the room and say hello. And there is this wonderful woman who was the CDO of United Way at the time. She had sent me a LinkedIn message and said, I saw a picture with you, Angela, and Derek. What are you doing? And I told her, the great work that we were doing with the NAACP. We were, shifting the model from just membership to individual giving and building this program. And she let me know about her work. She's also a student of Feeding America and lived in Chicago. And, she said, I'm building this thing and it's similar to the model that you're working on. And I need someone in office to support this team. And at the time, I was in a place of, when when I say legacy organizations and the elders lead you to where you are, I was a baby. Everyone told me, what to do and where to go and where my career was going and how to support their organizations. And I wanted to find my own footprint. And I also wanted a challenge. I wanted something meaty. And there's something about when someone believes in you, and sponsorship also is a through line of my career. And female sponsorship, there's always some really, really great woman that says, I see you, I want to support you. How can I, help you along this journey? And she saw me. And Alice Archibald, we started talking about, what she was doing at Worldwide and also the nut she couldn't crack. This is hard work. And sometimes when you're building teams, you're going through several iterations and it's trial after trial after trial. And, we talked and she said, I want to introduce you to this team. I have a role if you would be interested in it. apply and let's see what happens. And we saw what happened. And I interviewed and, I spoke with the leaders and the executives that were here. I got to sit down with Angela and really talk about, the thing that I built with a team and what the roles that were necessary to kind of not only take her leadership to the next level, but take the organization. So I'll transition to the United Way model. So you have 900 plus local United Ways in 30 plus countries. And I say give or take because it changes daily. They're their own 501(c)(3)s. So you think of franchise, right? You have the franchise. We are the headquarters office in Alexandria, Virginia, but we have a local United Way in DC. And they're all led by their own CEOs. Where they get support from us is through the licensing of the logo and the support to actually build their nonprofit from scratch. That's where Worldwide comes in. But the relationship management, we have a pass-through model. So we also have a philanthropic arm where we re-grant out to the network. So think scope and scale. We build up the fundraising and then we pass it. And, a lot of people think of United Way as pass through, but it's not pass through. It's this beautiful community chest. United Way was the first community chest in the US. And so it's this idea of galvanizing all of communities together to make sure we all can thrive. And so our role is to make sure that the locals can thrive, but they have the support they need to be successful. And so my team, which includes individual giving, foundation relations, and then some operations, I help support that team in some way. We're there to build, best in class process, but also make it easier on the locals. So you think of a transformational donor who can have an amazing impact, scope, and scale with multiple local United Ways, they will come to United Way Worldwide.
Yeah, I do thank you for that. I mean, it's a very rich both history and career that gets you to this point, and the work you do is significant, substantial, and certainly impactful. And as you talk about those that give, we've seen this trend, and maybe it's a feature of this moment in time or a longer term trend of mega donors. How has that impacted your work, but also how do you think about the sector as a whole? Is this a good thing? Is it just something that's necessary at the moment? Because we've seen folks like Mackenzie Scott and the monies that she's given to HBCUs, for example, which may be sustaining them in many respects at this moment. But is that a good thing? Do we need some more diversity there?
We definitely do, but they're the 1%. There's not enough
Right.
of them for all of us. And what has happened in the past is, we're fighting over what billionaire we can get to first. And we're forgetting about those grassroots donors, our true partners. And so I would say, the size of your org depends on if that is your pipeline, right? If you also have opportunity and connection with the those mega donors, then yes. But if it's a shot in the dark, don't forget, that $10, I think Feeding
Mm.
America's model was on, reoccurring gifts. That $10 a month moved the needle. And, they went from 100 to 200 to thousands to millions of sustainers. And so I think for me, this is the year of grassroots fundraising. And that's why I'm so excited, because that's how it started. This is the year on relationships and connecting with the Basils, the Crashondas, the folks that everyone might not know, but can have an enormous impact and care about your mission. And so I think the other thing I'm seeing is, donors now more than ever are a lot more savvy, less transactional, but interested in transparency, accountability, measurable results. They're making it harder. Mackenzie Scott is one that is doing trust-based philanthropy, which is fantastic. But it's a lottery, and you don't know if you'll
Mm.
win. You could wake up
Yeah.
one day and she called your number. That is, if that model if everyone imitates that model, it's not sustainable. You know, it's few of her, and there's more of Basil, Crashonda, Lonnie, more of you. I think for me, I use this model and I plug them all the time, and my team is probably going to roll their eyes. But, you know, Charity Water is a fantastic organization to me because they were the first nonprofit that captured me as a donor in my
Mm.
20s, and I had no money. And I've been giving, and you know, I just increased my giving because I've been able to, but my little $10 was like I felt like I gave them 1,000. The way that they steward me, the way that they made me feel connected to the mission. I mean, that postcard with the picture and with my name and everything was bespoke. And that care and that detail has maintained me as a donor for, you know, 15 years. That I think is more sustainable. Um, and more original than you know thousands of nonprofits going after mega donors. That's my take on it.
No, it's a great take, and it actually makes me raise a question. Now, I know you all were thinking about asking questions, but I have a question for everybody listening. Do you remember the first donation you made and to whom? Put that in the chat. I'd love to, or the Q&A actually, because I don't know if you have access to the chat, but I want to know where your first donation went. And I'm trying to think of it myself. It might have been to St. Luke's Episcopal Church in the Bronx where I grew up. Um, but you know, I wonder if it was to an organization called Youth Dare to Care. It might have been that because it was an organization and or the NAACP because both of those organizations were very impactful in growing up. Oh wow, look at that! Wounded Warriors, Jewish National Fund, United Way in Cincinnati, Ohio, through a job Dana had at the bank. Best Buddies Church, GoFundMe for a student. Look at that. My high school as a senior, Stanford Nature Center. Look at that. Autism Speaks in the Global Good. Hale House. Love Hale House. Thank you all for that. This is great feedback. Keep it coming because I'm really curious about where folks have given and thinking about how it impacted your life, Prashanda. It's great to think about how it's impacted all of our lives and how that got us going. There's a question in the chat that I want to come to. Andrew, thanks for this question. He thanks you for joining us today. He thanks me and Lonnie. Thank you, Andrew. Um, your expertise in diaspora philanthropy is incredibly important and a common theme we have discussed throughout this program from advocacy and strategy, scope and performance measurement, scope and impact. Thank you for mentioning our classes, Andrew. I'm glad they had an impact on you. As you coordinate fundraising across different cultural and regional contexts, how do you think about what's universal in generosity versus what requires deep cultural specificity? I love that question.
Mm, that's good. And I'll start with, you know, I think it's the one of the most powerful forces in modern giving because it's rooted in identity. I think, you know, to your, I can give an example. So I remember my first connection with diaspora philanthropy that I know of, that I can actually name it. I worked on, it was a partnership with a community from the Caribbean that was in New York City, because you know, they're a huge community, Caribbean community in New York City. And I approached them as though, you know, a case for support, you know, American philanthropy and, you know, how we, you know, talk to donors and traditional pitch. And it was polite, but it was limited. And I remember pausing because everyone was looking at me like, first off, why are you talking like that? Um, and I started listening and everything just shifted. It became more community centric. They started leading and telling me how to shape the initiative, how to get, you know, they were connecting the pipeline and saying, you know, that I know so and so, and you should connect with this person. And the giving increased more importantly, but I realized that people weren't just donors, they were, and that's when I really realized what partnership really is. And hopefully I'm answering your question, but that experience for me reinforced the simple truth that communities want collaboration. They don't want transaction, and they want to be the leaders in their community. And that has shifted for me what philanthropy and diaspora philanthropy really is. It's community led. We are literally just the vehicle that supports their giving. And that also shifts, I think now with all the civil unrest that is happening in the US, there's so many folks that are now more concerned with back home.
Mm.
That our job in this sector is to be concerned not with domestic, but internet back home. And we have to listen to folks of what back home looks like. And so that for me has been the difference of, this traditional modern approach of philanthropy and diaspora giving in philanthropy. The true leaders are in the community.
That's interesting because I wonder, it raises a really fascinating point because we hear a lot of stories about people in this moment feeling this chilling effect, the nervousness around giving because of to whom they're giving and what they're giving for. But maybe this is an opportunity for some to, owing to what you said earlier, step away necessarily from those big donors and then focus on those smaller donors because that concern may be there, but they feel a stronger connection to home or to what they're giving to.
Basil, the real opportunity, I think, is, I think internationally how many grassroots organizations have been struggling for years to get their footing, to build up sustainability for themselves. And what an opportunity right now that we have, as we think of nonprofit leadership, there is this, US-centric scope of how we think about the sector that for me, it's now so much broader, right? As a leader, you can lead not just a US organization. I see, more and more leaders thinking about, nonprofits abroad that they could bring their skill there and really transform the operations component that can really, transfer that international, you think of DAFs in the US, but now we're thinking of international donor advised giving, which United Way has coined the term years ago before DAFs were DAFs. There is this beautiful component of shared experience, but also shared revenue. And what does that look like? What does that component look like? And how do we build that out at scale to support those in need right now?
I'm going to go to a couple of questions because all of this has elicited some incredible questions. So I'm going to go to a couple of questions. I'm going to try to combine a couple just in the interest of time and wanting to get through as many as possible. Seren had a question about your professional artistic training and how it shaped your approach to building relationships and inspiring donors to see their role as, I like this, co-creators of impact. But I'm going to also come down to Andrew's question, because Andrew loves your take on institutional donors versus individual donors. But as a strategic storyteller serving the nonprofit space, how do you see telling stories as a way to connect with donors and amplify messaging? So a lot of around relationship building and narrative creation and storytelling. I imagine your acting and artistic background has helped that immensely.
I would say the first is my approach in building relationships, and especially once I get into the ask component, there's a lot of improv in that.
Yeah, right.
So much improv, and there's some great improv studios in New York City. So I think that if you're not an artist in any way, take an improv class. It would really teach you how to be on your toes, how to pivot, and how to really, in acting, it's yes and, right? Someone gives you something and you don't know what to do. You always say yes, and then you figure out what the and is. And that often helped with the no's, right? I never took a no as a no. It was just, there's another opportunity. Let me find another way. I'm gonna get you some way. And that improv, my artistic background on community, an artist there's a great book called The Artist Way. If you have an opportunity, and forget the author, but it teaches you how to tell a story that is both creative and can capture the reader, the audience, but it really comes from your soul. And
Yeah.
that book really has helped me to connect with people deeper than the external, but really connect with their souls. And that's what, my artistic background has helped with. I'm looking at these other questions.
Yeah, I know. So Andrew says Julia Cameron is the author. Reagan loves The Artist Way.
Okay.
Nicole recommends HB Studios for one.
Oh, that's
Young
good.
Paul, it's good to see. It's good to hear from you, my friend. Former an alum of the program. He says it's a fascinating discussion. Wonderful to hear about the recognition of the importance of operational excellence. Crashonda, can you share about how boards have supported achieving the various missions?
Oh my good, your volunteers are essential. Uh, your board are volunteers. They've been, my hook when I come into an organization is I partner with the CEO, but I'm in community with the board. And I really, really, they're volunteers. And for me, they've been instrumental in my career to getting to know them, knowing who their family is. I do research on every board member. Before I took a role, I knew who the board was, I knew their career, I knew their family, if it was available, screen and make sure I knew what their capacity to give was. But those are your partners in crime. Those are the folks that will advocate, especially for fundraisers, on the work that needs to be done. And they're also they're my midnight call, right? At the end of the year, we need to close the gap. We need your support and we need you to dig deep right now. Those are the folks that can really, help you get to goal. But boards are instrumental. I would also say, and I'm bold and oftentimes I might not say all the right things, but I also look at the board as accountability, right? As staff, we're not by ourselves. In order for us to have the greatest impact, we need them. They have to show up and they have to do their part. And so oftentimes I will say that. And most of them are professionals and they know, especially with that fourth quarter race, they know what it takes. And so if you have a board and once you get into your role, really deep dive and do your research on who the board members are. And if there are some folks that might not be right on the board, I'm also, very honest about that. Governance versus fundraising. It's hand in hand in nonprofit in my book. I think there's another question. I love your insights on collaborative fundraising. Oh, you've been taking a look at our strategic plan right now.
Yeah.
How can organizations with similar missions build networks that strengthen our collective financial resilience instead of competing for the same grants? There is a great article, I think it was yesterday on the Chronicle and Philanthropy on their website about collaborative fundraising. And I think it was a few NGOs that came together and they went from 2.6 million and now they raised $9 million in a year and a half. I am collaborative fundraising is the only path, I think, for us to go forward without government partnerships. It is going to be it's going to be, I want to say, instrumental in our survival and sustainability. Right now, I'm piloting with, some of our local United Ways on a collaborative fundraising model where we look at ultra high net worth individuals that are in a certain region and partnering with the ask, giving them the opportunity of scope and scale. That's one thing with the federated model. The locals, there's a cap on their ask, right? Because for a wealthy individual, they think in their community, $100,000 might go a really long way. It will. Nationally, $100,000, it's a drop in the bucket. And so when we collaborate and work together, there's so much more support we can offer multiple communities at the same time. So it is instrumental for mission building. It's going to strengthen our collective impact within the entire sector. And also with financial resiliency, like I think now more than ever, the CEOs of these, top organizations are now speaking to each other and saying, how can we, work together without ego, without, you know, um, pushing, we're all in the same community. We all are supporting the same community.
Do you feel that there are folks that really are speaking to each other sort of behind the scenes? Because I think there's some fear that, with folks that, people are so scared they're just kind of drill down in their space and not be trying to find ways to figure this out behind the scenes. That's reassuring, as you've said.
Oh, they are. And there's orgs like, Nonprofit Council, and there are conveners that are pulling us together. The other cool thing that I'm seeing in the sector, there are philanthropists that are becoming conveners to build a space where there's no competition. And they also, too, understand that they have to lean in. And, there's a trend. I know, folks are paying attention to what's happening in fundraising that, donors are choosing, one nonprofit they weren't, as opposed to their four last year, just based on, layoffs and where people are financially. But they are speaking, and I'm really, really excited and thrilled that the private sector is leaning in, and those Fortune 500 companies are starting to sponsor convenings for nonprofits to make sure that money's not an issue, to have a conversation. And so that is happening. And United Way has been at the table and been invited and been a part of those conversations.
So we've got a few questions here in the chat, in the Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes, and we like to stay on time. So for those that still have questions to ask, please feel free to put them in the Q&A so we can get to them. Matt Coleman's had a question on here for a while that I want to get to because it touches on something I wanted to bring back to the conversation that you mentioned. Matt's question is, in your journey across states and communities, how do you intentionally lead in a way that honors your identity as a Black woman while still building bridges that unite people from every background? And you touched on this earlier, this point about sponsorship and I guess mentorship. Could you really talk about that? Because it's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And I say that just as a quick aside. I'm a Gen Xer, and I know that a lot of folks that wanted to get into the public service space, and probably in any other space, we went through a thing where folks said, wait your turn. And maybe we didn't find a lot of mentors, so we kind of had to figure things out on our own. I don't know if you experienced that. It sounds like you didn't have that you actually had a lot of support. So could you talk a little bit about that and sponsorship and identity?
So start with identity. I'm a Black woman, and I'm a proud Black woman. I never can get away from that. And the way that I honor my identity is I show up as my full and authentic self. And this is new. I remember when I started as a fundraiser, I have in braids now, but I remember straightening my hair to fit and, wearing the pencil skirt and trying to shape and mold myself to fit the look and the image that would be acceptable and appeasing to a certain audience. And what I realize is I won't do that. I shouldn't do that. And my authenticity, my identity is what makes me unique. It's what makes me memorable. And my name is Crashonda. Like, I can't run away from it. And so I would say I show up that way, but I also am very unapologetic that I sponsor Black women. There's less of us in this space. And if there is an opportunity to lift them up, to shine a light on them, I know what it takes to get to this level and how many no's you have to go through. And so my role is always to lift up Black women in this space. But the other thing I want to emphasize is my door is never closed. So I want to shout out Aiden Kofi if he's on here. One of the students of your department
Aiden,
reached
yes.
out. Aiden is just wonderful, a white male and beautiful in heart. And he sent me this message on LinkedIn just to say hello and pick my brain. And so my door is never closed to young people, to anyone who's interested in the sector who wants to talk or chat. I lead with that. Mentorship is what got me here. Sponsorship, I say women, but that's who saw me and said, I'm going to speak into your life and open some of those doors and make life a little easier. The other thing is, you know, being Black is, and I have a 7-year-old daughter, and I often tell her it's a superpower, but everybody else has a superpower, and it's up to you to find out what their superpower is. And the superpower of also being Black is our legacy. And we're celebrating 100 years of Black History Month, but we had Black History Week. And if you haven't delved into how this month started, our history is so rich and so tragic at the same time that I don't have a choice. I really, carry my ancestors on my community on my back and on my shoulders. Um,
Well, shout out to Aiden who did say thank you on this Q&A and your tenacity and perseverance. We appreciate you, Aiden. Shout out to LinkedIn because you've mentioned it twice in our conversation. So everybody got to make sure that they get their LinkedIn strategy up, right?
That's right. LinkedIn is the new thing. It's the new social media.
It is.
Yeah.
There is a question that it's got some numbers in there, so I'm going to be quick because we don't have much time left. But it's an important question. Audrey asks, 2025 study found that 60% of nonprofits operate on less than $50,000 annually and receive only 0.4% of foundation funding. 46% are led by CEOs of color. Government grants are too complex. Philanthropy favors scale, excluding community-rooted nonprofits. There's a cycle of exclusion. Audrey appreciates stories about helping the NAACP build. For those outside small nonprofits, how can we best approach and offer help? Since in my experience, they often lack the capacity to even accept assistance, especially those all volunteer organizations. Important question. How do you approach and engage and support nonprofits that don't even know or have the capacity to ask for the help?
So in those percentages also represent United Ways. So about 70% of United Ways are in the same category. I would say the first thing is volunteering is the most important thing you can do to help those smaller nonprofits, either joining their board, especially if you have a skill set that can be beneficial for them for sustainability. So that's one. The other thing is collaborative fundraising. We just talked about it. Have them at least drop that nugget. Is there's a local NGO that's doing the same work that you're doing? You don't have the capacity for that gift, share that gift. I mean, that's where the model of United Way has come in and helps a lot of communities, is because we are the convener, but we also help spread those gifts and with cast a wider net to support folks who can't necessarily manage a large gift. But that volunteer component, I don't know if you know the trend wise, volunteering went down the past 3-4 years. You think about revenue decline, but that's also volunteerism, give of your time, talent, and treasure. And that time component is instrumental for those smaller shops with 1 or 2 or 3 people that can't move forward. I mean, even to this day, I take my Thanksgiving and we still, volunteer at our local food bank because we know the capacity. I was there and it was one person doing 5 jobs. And so if you haven't joined a board, there is this allure and prestige. I was telling my team, there's a prestige that comes with, joining a board, but to them, they need you. And so you can take the prestige, but roll up your sleeves and do the work and support those locals. And I also say give of your time to places that connect with you. They have to be your interest because you're going to do some really hard work and not be paid. But if you're really interested, you're invested in the mission, you know the need in the community for that organization, join the board. And get on the finance committee, get on the fundraising committee, whatever committees they need, become a chair for their, gala, whatever they need. I think that's a start.
Oh. We have just time for maybe two quick questions. Valerie, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us today. Sonia loves our insights on collaborative fundraising. How can organizations with similar missions build networks? And I think we touched on this before, but if there's some points you want to reiterate it.
I would say the first step with collaborative fundraising is feasibility, right? So we think big campaign of doing a feasibility. I've started with just looking at the market, mapping out what the potential is, where the asks are, where the connections are, but really whoever the NGOs that are collaborating, really sit down and map out, not just who but what the work that is connected to the impact area and how that person falls in line with your mission. And so that, I think for our sector, is instrumental. Think of these top 5 orgs. We have some major donors that have given to us. How do we connect and press them? The DAF strategy also goes into that collaborative fundraising. These donor advised funds who need to re-grant and release some of that money, that's where collaborative fundraising can come in as well.
And last question from Mariana. Hey, Mariana, good to see you here. Based on your experience, what best practices have you found for most effective in donor cultivation and stewardship, especially in helping donors move up the giving pyramid from an initial gift to a planned gift?
Two things. I arm my major gift officer, or major gift, if you're pitching or proposal, you're also bringing in a planned gift opportunity. So it's diversifying. Everyone talks about the same thing. How we move a donor up the pyramid is all the pipeline. Everyone has a potential to make a planned gift, including the board. And if they're on here, I love you dearly. But, everyone has that potential. So planned gift should be a part of your proposal for any donor. It should be a part of the conversation. Free Will does a fabulous job for those smaller nonprofits that can't help with that, heavy lift of, having one designated to being a frontline fundraiser for a planned gift. But I would diversify and diversify the ask and bring in that planned gift also with, even if it is with a small gift, it's still an opportunity for them to even gauge their interest and just leave something with them as they're thinking about making a gift to your organization.
Now, I'm a moderator's privilege. I will ask the last question, but before I do that, just to, again, thank everybody for joining us today. There will be a recording of this conversation available soon, and look out for our other conversations. We do this once a month, and we are so grateful to have all these incredible leaders come and talk to us about the work that they do, and the ability for the nonprofit management program at Columbia to have this platform is extraordinary. So on that point, the last question I will ask, I will hope that you can direct to our students. For those that are starting out in the space or still very young in this sector, what are some nuggets of advice for resilience in this moment?
I would say if you commit to learning, as you all are, and you commit to listening and leading with integrity, you'll build a meaningful career. The first step in all of that is kindness. The kindness you show yourself is the same kindness that you'll show to someone else. You all are part of shaping how communities support one another, but it starts with you. And that work that you have to dedicate to yourself, internally, externally. I often say to my team, it's taboo to say, but it's the truth. If you need therapy, get therapy. If you need someone to talk to, talk to. Nonprofits are not therapy. They're meant to help other people. But if you are empty, You have to start with yourself. Take care of yourself, and you can change lives.
Nonprofits are not therapy. I'm going to take that with. I'm going to write that down and put it in a book. I will credit you though, and I'll probably say it a few times publicly, but I will credit you. That is a fantastic statement. Crashonda Andrew, you are a superstar. And for your time with us, it's been extraordinary. I know everybody got a lot out of it. Just keep seeing enriching, powerful, scattered around these chats. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And we will stay in touch.
Can I drop one nugget?
Of course you can.
I have an internship program opening up for this summer. I have 2 interns that I would love to be a part of the Global Philanthropy team. I will send it to Basil and Lonnie, but it's truly an honor and it is a pleasure. And I wish you all well. Thank you, Basil. Thank you, Lonnie.
Thank you, and God bless. And we will be in touch soon. Everyone, stay tuned for the next set of conversations. We look forward to it. Take care, everybody.